This afternoon, I want to discuss a fundamental problem in education that countries like my own and yours face. It is, in some sense, a problem of policy, but it's more than a problem of policy. It arises from two historic developments. One is an over-reliance on the macro structure of schooling, resource allocation policies, schemes to organize and reorganize the structure of schooling, on the one hand, and the underdevelopment of what I call the microstructure of schooling, teaching, learning, school management, professional education, here and in the U.S. and in other democracies. Perhaps the most fundamental working assumption is that schools can, on the one hand, teach children the common beliefs that will create social and political solidarity, and on the other, teach them the critical thinking that will make it possible for them to resist demagogic politicians, tyrants, and other enemies of democracy. It's an interesting dualism there, that schools should, on the one hand, inculcate belief that would hold political society together, but on the other hand, should teach the elements of critical thinking, i.e. doubt, that will enable these believing citizens to resist the temptations of demagogues and tyrants. The creation of those systems expressed the view that the content of children's minds was so important to state and society that the state, through government-sponsored and government-operated schools, should mold what existed in those minds. That government, not families, not communities, but government should decide on the content of curricula, the nature of exams and tests, teachers' conditions of employment, shaping children's minds, which we are so familiar with that, like the ocean to fish, we don't really notice it. That the content of children's minds was so crucial to sustaining the modern nation state that shaping the content of those minds would become a state function. So, if you want to go somewhere to influence what students do, you go within schools. But if you go within schools, to influence student achievement, you have to rely on the micro world of teaching and learning and school management. And these are not things that politicians and policymakers can very well influence. Certainly not things that they tried to influence. So the macro structure of schooling, which deals mostly with school-to-school differences, gives us a very modest purchase on the things that might influence students' learning. The microstructure gives us much more room to move in influencing students' learning, but it consists of things that policy has not attended to very carefully. Now, I'm not making an argument against policy making. It's essential, and whatever we think of it, it's unavoidable. But I am making an argument, and in a certain sense this is the most important thing I want to say, that policy, resource allocation, incentives, system organization, these things matter insofar as they are used within schools. What influences students' performance is not the amount of money that's spent on the school, by and large. It's not the particular curriculum that is used. It's not the number of degrees that teachers have. It is how the teachers set academic tasks and how they pay attention to students' work with those tasks. That does make a difference to students' performance. So it's the teachers' and students' use of the resources. I mean, they can't use resources they don't have. But in developed societies, although there are big macro policy problems, many teachers in the U.S. and I gather here work under extremely difficult conditions. Secondary school teachers trying to teach 200 students, which is it's as close to impossible as you can get. But if tomorrow we cut that number and we cut that ratio in half, there would still be a great deal of work to do to help teachers learn how to use the resource called smaller class size. To use it effectively. So there is a kind of an interesting symbiotic or potentially symbiotic relationship here. People in the micro world of school do depend on macro policy for resources, incentives. But the world of macro policy depends on people at work in that micro world for the capabilities to use those resources well. I think that mutual dependence has been, it certainly has not been very much appreciated by policymakers. When a great high school teacher retires, most of what that teacher knows and knows how to do retires with her. So I am arguing that without professional practical knowledge that is validated and is general within the profession, and without the structures that can support and sustain and improve that knowledge, no amount of macro policy can have much of an effect on teaching or learning. If we want to improve the effects of policy on practice, we need to improve the capabilities of practice. Imagine that we are a committee to improve restaurants, to improve restaurant cuisine in some nameless country. Who on such a committee would believe that if we just built restaurants and created menus and even subsidized people's eating at the restaurants, that we could thereby create good cuisine? No one would believe this. If someone suggested that in such a committee, everyone would say, well, look, I mean, you can't go out to dinner if there isn't a restaurant. You can't decide what to eat if there isn't a menu. It helps to subsidize the meal. But if you want good food, you have to train good cooks. Thank you.